This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the second week of March 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. And of course, we're just hours away now from UFC 171. We'll be talking a whole lot about that subject and some others right here on the show. So let's introduce the panel and get right to it. Joining us from the SiriusXM Fight Club and MMAfighting.com, he is the returning Luke Thomas. Also returning is Mike Chiappetta of FoxSports.com. And the man with the shirt replacing the man with the hat, Jeff Wagenheim
Not
of Sports
replacing.
Illustrated.
There's no such thing as replacing. I'll do my best, folks.
You will, and I have no doubt of that.
Keeping the chair warm.
Guys, let's talk about UFC 171. But first, let's talk about UFC pay-per-views right off the bat. This is the third UFC pay-per-view of 2014. There have been a lot of shows, but the third numbered event. Do the pay-per-views, in your opinion, still have that glow? Do they feel special to you as opposed to Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1 card, etc.?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because if you look at this card on paper, the 171, we'll see I don't know how you guys feel. It's a hardcore fan's delight. I mean, at really every stage of it. On the Fight Pass, you have Justin Scoggins, who I think is the next big thing at flyweight. Then on the Fox Sports 2 prelims, you've got a bevy of fights to pick from, including a good women's fight. Obviously, the main card is like they're just resettling the entire welterweight division. What's not to like? And then I talked to sort of people who are on the casual side of things, my brother and some previous coworkers. They didn't even know there was a UFC event this weekend. You know, and they don't mean that maliciously. Like they just didn't know. So on the one hand, is the UFC setting out a card that if you're a mixed martial arts fan, there's many reasons to love? Yes, but have they curated the product in a way this year that makes this individual weekend special? Based on what I'm reading, no.
It's always a superstar-driven sport, right? There's just no superstar on this particular card. Like when we were at UFC 168, it felt pretty special. Right. You know, that it had that buzz. Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva, the rematch. It was huge. Anderson Silva's a superstar. It's going to take a while to get some of this new sort of era of guys, especially when you're talking about this welterweight division, to that sort of level, if they ever get there at all. But it takes time, and if there's no superstar, it's not going to feel like, you know, a mega event.
Let's say the superstar is the ghost of GSP. You know, the absence, the void that's been left by GSP's absence, and so that in a way is kind of the superstar, and it also. You know, we saw this dominance from him for year after year after year, and now we've got a whole bunch of guys, you know, including the two top fights in the card. Who knows who's going to be the ones going to emerge?
This pay-per-view is not going to do anywhere close to what a GSP event would do, but to me, like, it's so much more exciting to like have this group of welterweights that, as you said, it's going to kind of shake out the division now. Like, the division has been kind of stagnant for a while, and that's no disrespect to George. He was a great champion, and
he made it stagnant by domination.
Exactly, but now it's like, what's going to happen? Like, this is why we watch. Like, what's going to happen with GSP? You kind of knew what was going to happen. Now we don't know. That's why we watch sports.
You know what's crazy to me is like, I wonder how much Hendricks. You know, did he get robbed? Did he not get robbed against GSP? I scored the fight for Hendricks. I think a lot of people did, but whatever. I'm not here to recast that debate. But what I would say is, I wonder how much him not getting the clean transition of the title is hurting him here, because that was a well-watched fight, and people sort of recognized that Johnny Hendricks was a guy to be reckoned with. Going into this one, I'm not sure he's pulling that same enthusiasm that he had right after the decision was rendered for Georges St-Pierre. So that to me is a bit of a curious dynamic as well.
I think a lot of the people who watch it though feel like he won that fight, you know, and I do agree with you. I did. I think it was almost unanimous, like among the media, that Hendricks won the fight.
Dave Meltzer, I believe.
I actually scored it for GSP, but the fight was won by Hendricks. But I felt like the athletic contest was won by GSP.
Right. I do think that if there was a clean transition of power there would be a lot more momentum behind Johnny Hendricks, and now he sort of has to restart it from scratch. But I think he's got a lot of elements to be a star, and really sort of a transcendent star. Like, he's got this like middle America kind of vibe to him. He's like the working class guy. He's got some pretty good sponsors behind him already that can kind of push him to that level. I heard the New York Times is following him around this weekend. That's a pretty big deal. You know, so
and Jeff brings up a very interesting point, because, you know, oftentimes I feel like if a champion vacates a title and then there's a new fight to crown a new champion, it always feels like the new champion isn't quite the champion because he didn't beat the guy. For example, in Bellator, when Douglas Lima and Rick Hahn fight for the welterweight title, it's going to feel like they're sort of not the fake champion, but not the real champion of Bellator, because Askren was the champion, he vacated the title. But because Hendricks, in many people's eyes, won that fight, does it soften the blow a little bit? Like, in your mind, if GSP would have won 5-0 and then walked away, Hendricks getting an immediate shot at the title would have felt different. This time
he wouldn't be in this position if it was a complete shutout.
Perhaps, but in my eyes, and I have this hard rule where I don't like it when a guy vacates. Even Jose Aldo, I didn't want to see him vacate the title because I want to see dominant champions. I want to see how long they could go. But this one feels a little different because that fight was somewhat controversial. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that he won. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. Well, it's funny. I was looking at our website, si.com, and I had a story that's running this. Yes, si.com. A story this week, the crash course to the main event, and the picture that they ran was at the end of the fight when Hendricks walks away, sort of like this, triumphantly, and GSP sort of like slumped over a little bit, like
he's kind of got his hand
almost resigned, to what might be happening there. And I had given them the option. They asked me what they should run. I said, well, you could do that, or you could have the picture of GSP celebrating at the end and Hendricks on his knees. But they chose the picture of the guy who had just, looked like he had won the fight and triumphantly walking away. And I think there is that lingering image in a lot of people's minds of this is the guy, that a lot of people think won. And so it does soften the blow a little bit. He's the champ.
I mean, think about what we're saying here. And what he said, this is the ghost of GSP. This is not the beginning of the reign of Johnny Hendricks. Those are two different, the feel is very, very different when you're still saying, well, it's the absence of St-Pierre and it's the vying for what's not there.
Yeah, but that's now. Saturday night might feel completely different if Johnny Hendricks goes out there and destroys Robbie Lawler.
Pre-fight hype.
So are you feeling the effects of GSP leaving? Do you feel like his presence is still there?
Based on the way things are set up, unfortunately, yes, but I felt so strong that Hendricks won that to me he's the de facto guy. I mean, this is, for me, just personally speaking, I do feel like this is the beginning of his reign. We'll see what happens with Lawler, obviously, but I just think that the fans out there, when you can't make that clean handover, a democratic election with peaceful, that's the sign of a democracy, right? And you can change power peacefully and through elections. It didn't happen that way. It's a mess, and they're having to sort of resort it by no fault of their own. Just that's the way the judging works, and I just feel like it's a speed bump. You have to. I'm making a bunch of metaphors here, starting the mower, whatever you want to say. It just feels like it's an extra step that has to happen. As a consequence, that is sort of impeding interest.
Is there any doubt in your mind now that GSP is going to come back? Because he just said a couple of days ago, don't blink. His tone is changing. He seems to be in a very good spot. He's no longer very controversial towards the UFC. It doesn't feel like, to me, there was a point maybe in December where he was going to go out and make real change in this sport and really go after the UFC. Now it just seems like he's taking a vacation.
I still have some doubt whether he'll come back. I mean,
Really?
he seems like has such a good time in life. Why does he want to put himself back in that mind frame where he's just obsessing and compulsing over, whether it's Johnny Hendricks or Robbie Lawler or whoever gets the title or he's going to fight in the future? Why put himself back in that mind space if he's really happy now? I'm just playing devil's advocate, but when I look at him, you see that the happiness. He's talking to the media now. He's having a good time.
He's talking more to the media now than he ever did.
He's traveling
It's
all over the
unbelievable.
place. He seems like he's having a good time. So I don't know. I don't know if we'll see him back.
I'm with you. I have doubts as well, but I also, what I question is his self-awareness. And I remember when he had made his announcement that he was stepping away. I remember asking him during that conference call, what happens? You step away, you relax, you're no longer stressed, and you go through all this period of time. How are you going to know that if you do come back, you're not going to end up right back where you were? And he really didn't. He couldn't either. He didn't want to answer that question, or he couldn't answer that question. And I think that's one of the things he needs to sort out before he decides to come back. And I'm not sure he would be able to sort that out. I mean, he might not know what's going to happen when he comes back. He might end up in the exact same spot. So who knows? I mean, who knows where he's going to be?
Also say, you know what? My legacy is safe here. I've taken off a year. Why put myself back into this and risk losing? I've got my money. I've got my legacy. I'm happy. Let the division move on without me.
It doesn't feel to me like he's... In December, I thought he was really going to try to do some change. Now it just feels like he's content with talking about this through the media, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of things happened. He did that. He made a stink. Then they banned TRT in Nevada. And the UFC said we're going to ban it when we have regulatory authority.
You think those two events were related?
Related or not, I think he was like, okay, you know what, that's progress. I can live with that. I think that. I mean, and again, in your article, it just pushes it underground. But I think to what GSP wanted to see was at least some measure of effort to curb that in. As far as coming back, my sense about it is, you watch that interview from Brazil.
Yeah.
He says he put on 3 kilos of muscle. He looked a little bit bigger. I mean, I don't know if it was the shading of the camera, but he seemed to be looking in good physical condition. He's still training. And I just feel like when he can do MMA on his terms, because he likes to do it, and by MMA I guess in this context I mean training, because he's still training. And when he can talk to the press on his terms about things he wants to do versus, these cattle calls of interviews he has to do, these radio tours, and then he enjoys it. When he gets to do it voluntarily, it's a process he wants to be a part of. I think that he got out of this thing late. He was feeling burdened for a long time. Even though he's feeling better now, I don't think he's going to rush back in. Whether he comes back or not, I don't know. But if he does come back, I don't think it'll be immediate. I still think he's got a long way to go of self-repair and enjoyment
That's kind of why I have doubts. Like, I feel the same way. Like, he's not going to rush back in. But after, say he sits on the sidelines for a year, at some point, isn't he going to say, you know what, I'm a year older now. I had a tough time against Johnny Hendricks. The rest of the division is probably catching up with me as it is. Why put myself through that, physically and mentally? That's why I have questions.
But then when's the next challenge for him too? I mean, that part of it is, he has that kind of that mindset of a champion, and what is he going to think about? What is he going to be thinking about a year from now?
Is Johnny Hendricks is still looking for an executive director?
I thought Roy Nelson was going to take that
Nelson
job.
took that one. Come on. But let's say a year from now we're sitting here and Johnny Hendricks has defended the welterweight championship 3 times and is looking like gangbusters. Is GSP going to say, well, hey, I want to go back and take him out? Or what if the belt has been handed over from Hendricks or from Lawler to somebody else, and there's no kind of like one guy? I think the times are going to somewhat determine what GSP decides to do.
At this point, I'd be shocked if he doesn't come back. That's just the impression that I'm getting. But it's interesting.
I never would peg him to follow the Frank Shamrock route, but I do think that there's something might happen in a year's time where he could come back. Maybe he doesn't fight at welterweight. If he's 3 kilos heavier and he likes the way he feels, maybe if anybody, and I know the UFC hates catchweight fights, but if anybody can talk the UFC into it, it's probably Georges St-Pierre. We'll see what the terms could be, but I wouldn't rule out. I mean, this idea he's just going to go back to welterweight.
Versus Anderson?
I mean,
catchweight?
We'll see. You never know. I think
it'd be a good return fight for both of them.
Yeah,
would make a lot of sense. It's interesting. We've been talking for a few minutes here, and except for you, very briefly, we haven't mentioned Robbie Lawler, who's the other part of this.
You mentioned Robbie Lawler.
Okay, well, I mean, we haven't really been focused. Yeah, exactly. My point is, I really think this is one of the most amazing comeback stories in the history of MMA. I can't stop thinking about the time we were in Chicago and he was asleep at the press conference, and that was almost like a metaphor for his career. At that point, he was just, mailing it in. He was taking these Strikeforce fights against guys that, did not motivate him. He was fighting at 185. He was winning some, losing some. Wrestlers were out wrestling him. Comes back to the UFC, drops down to 170, and looks like a completely different person, completely different fighter. He's a family man, training with ATT. Who saw this coming, really? I mean, this is, even if he doesn't win on Saturday night, the fact that he's here and deserves to be here is one of the great stories in MMA history, right?
You know what's funny, to your point about falling asleep with the press conference? There were years, I remember, that went by. I mean, full-on years, where it was widely regarded that Robbie Lawler was the worst interview in MMA. Because you would talk to him and you'd be like, really, what's going on in your life? What's going on in your camp? Nothing. Feeling good. Great. I mean, it was pulling blood from stone. It was unbelievable. And not that he's sort of become Chael Sonnen recently, but if you look at his interviews now, he's explaining his life and he's talking about his career and he's reflecting and being thoughtful about it. That to me is just change enough. But it's crazy. If you look at his Strikeforce tenure, he's a sub 500 in Strikeforce. He won 3, lost 5, if I'm not mistaken. He didn't do well in Strikeforce. I think he's one of these guys who had a lot of natural talent, but he really could only succeed when he had the external architecture, the apparatus around him to really make him what he could be. For briefly, it was the Miletich system, and that's what it went away. I don't really know that he got what he needed out of the hit squad, whatever that was worth, but I think at ATT, he is old enough to know what he can do, what he should do, and ATT is the kind of environment where he can bring all his skills to life finally as he's mature enough to push himself. So he's one of these guys that I just feel like he could peak for a while and then he would fall flat and peak and fall flat. And I think he's now in one of those peak stages.
It seems like he was sort of on a journey of finding himself through Strikeforce, right?
Sure.
Like, he's a guy that kind of found stardom really young. He was 18 or 19 when he started fighting. He was in the UFC at 20.
Yeah.
Kind of like Vitor a little bit, like a phenom, a prodigy. And he's kind of taking this roundabout way. I think probably when you get stardom and success so early, even though, we weren't making huge money back then, but still in his sport he was a star, it probably, it has to play with your mind a little bit. You're not totally equipped to handle all that comes with it. All these expectations. From the beginning, people were like, oh, this guy's a future UFC champion. When he's 19, 20 years old, right? That's a lot to handle. And then when he didn't get there and he had some setbacks, there had to be moments where he doubted himself, right? So he got past that. He's also a guy. Chuck Mindenhall wrote a great piece on MMA Fighting this week about the Miletich fighting systems and all the guys that came out of it. He had to have so much respect for that UFC championship. All the guys who went through that gym won a title. When he left the UFC, he didn't have a chance. There was no way to win that thing for him. He came back. That has to mean something to him more than a lot of other guys. That UFC title was in Miletich's gym for so long between him and Tim Sylvie and Matt Hughes. And for him to be part of that championship lineage, Jens Pulver, that chance was gone for so long. It's a big deal to him now.
Every good story has a story arc. And it just seems like the timing worked really well. When he came back to the UFC, his first fight was against Koscheck. And at that time, now we sort of look at Koscheck as maybe being a guy that was sort of fading. But at that time, he had lost. Koscheck had lost to GSP, and he lost to who's the other one?
Tiago.
Was it Hendricks?
Hendricks. He had lost to Hendricks in a split decision, and he lost to GSP before that, and went the distance. So Koscheck still had there was some weight behind Koscheck, and he goes out there and just wrecks him. Then he goes out and he wrecks the next guy he faces. And then he goes out and he faces sort of the flavor of the month, Rory McDonald, and it wasn't quite as spectacular a performance, but he beat him.
It showed his maturation as a fighter, actually.
It kind of, it was like the right time, the right opponents, and of course, he got the right result.
The right weight class too.
Sure, yeah, totally.
That was a big deal.
Excellent call. Yeah. You look at his resume, like he's one of these guys where before fights, I look at guys' resumes just to sort of see where they've been and look at maybe there's are they in a win streak, a loss streak, just to remind myself. His resume is weird, man. It's full of welterweight, middleweight, welterweight, catchweight, middleweight, welterweight. He was sort of bouncing around. He wasn't managing his own career very well, missing weight on occasion too, So I feel like now that he's at welterweight, as you mentioned, he's got a goal. He's got a team around him. He's got maturity on his side. One thing he never lost was his reputation for ferocity. He was getting his ass kicked in that Melvin Manhoef fight, and then he came back and just, rearranged his brain. So I think he always knew he had ability. He just had a reason to bring it to life, and it seems like now he's got it.
One theory I have about Robbie Lawler, and there's obviously some that makes sense, being a father now, new team, new weight class. But anytime you talk to Robbie Lawler about pro sports, football, basketball, he lights up. He likes the major leagues. And I think that he felt he wasn't in the major leagues. And for a long time, you'd look at him at the weigh-ins. He would be there with Matt or someone else. You'd see him and Dana, and they had a great relationship. You could tell he lit up. And I think being back in the major leagues gave him that push to say, I need to make something of my career. Now here he is making something of his career. It's a great story. And it really is interesting to see how fans are reacting to this fight, because there's no kind of doubt in the back of their mind, it's going to be a 5-round, snooze fest, a GSP type of fight. I think a lot of people are expecting fireworks for the first time, and I hate that word, but for the first time in a long time in a welterweight title fight, you don't really know what's going to happen, but you're expecting something great, and I think that's refreshing to a lot of fans. The UFC has a very interesting dilemma on their hands, though, with the co-main event and the Jake Shields-Hector Lombard fight, because Tyron Woodley lost to Jake Shields in June. It wasn't that long ago, but he's in a bigger fight than Jake Shields. He's fighting Carlos Condit. He's been talking a lot. He's looked good since then. If Jake Shields wins, especially after what he has done as of late, and Tyron Woodley wins, and if they give Tyron Woodley the next title shot and not Jake Shields, that will say a lot about the UFC right now, right?
I don't think it was saying anything new.
I agree.
They've never had it in so perfectly where they'll really go the entertainment route over
this would be a rather naked choice about what they were. Because they even pulling up Kimbo Slice was one thing, but they made him go through the feeder system. Look, there's a reason UFC doesn't do tournaments. If they would, they could set up brackets and then the best guy just moves forward. But they don't have tournaments for a reason, because it gives them flexibility to make money. Listen, Jake Shields is incredible. I think he's got the most, I've said this before on this very show, I think he's got the most underrated resume in all of MMA.
It's ridiculous. He's lost like twice in 10 years.
The dude's scalps that he's collected at different weight classes, it's nuts what he's done, man. But and I don't know if he can get by Lombard. Lombard seems to be a ferocious test, but we'll see, But in the end, the reality is, man, 2013 was a stronger year for the UFC. 2014 has been, it's a new paradigm shift with all the Fight Pass shows, and the pay-per-views haven't been that strong. The stars are out. they're going to make strong considerations toward being able to have a financially solvent and profitable product. And Jake Shields, for all his merit, and I'm the one who's seeing it.
Promotional malpractice.
Of course.
It's a long time.
Right. Dude, Jake Shields, I know you're not going to find a bigger fan than me, but the reality is he is not the path to doing that. Tyrone Woodley, assuming he beats Carlos Condit in a reasonably entertaining fashion, that them's the breaks.
So if Shields beats Lombard, Woodley beats Condit, you still have to go with Woodley?
I don't know that you have to, but to say it would be like some big statement on the UFC's negative matchmaking, if he beats Carlos Condit, that is a huge deal.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's
dude,
Carlos
Jake
Condit.
Shields, I think Jake Shields, I would favor him heavily to beat Carlos Condit. Heavily.
And let's not forget, Jake
Of course,
Shields way
it's
back
style.
when did beat Carlos Condit.
it's
Jake
all-
Shields has a win over Carlos Condit.
2006, but
It's
still.
all a styles thing, but my point is beating Carlos Condit is a big feather in your cap. I
Absolutely.
mean, once you beat Carlos Condit, if you beat Carlos Condit, you are a legitimate title contender. So it's not like a huge stretch to say, oh, we'll put him in a title shot. No, that's.
But could you
that's
imagine
right
if
around
you're
the
Jake
corner.
Shields and you just
of
beat
course.
this guy in June?
I get that. That's a fair argument, of course.
It wouldn't be the worst matchmaking for a title fight that the UFC has done in our memory, in our recent memory, really. But I think that talking about it today versus talking about it Sunday they're completely different things, because you get that win over Condit if it happens, and that makes him a whole different guy than the guy who he is right now. Who you sort of like the loss to Shields gets fades a little bit.
Do we agree, though, that if Condit wins, he deserves the shot, no matter if Hendricks wins, Lawler wins, Condit should be next? And, Roy McDonald has been saying that he wants next. Condit deserves it, right?
Deserves? What do you mean?
Based on his resume, based on what he's done.
I mean, he's the most sellable guy. Obviously, the first fight between, assuming Hendricks wins, right?
Right.
Hendricks and
Great fight, close fight.
And it'd be a very different
Three-round
fight.
fight.
Right. It'd be different at 5 rounds.
Right.
I mean, and in fact, I think Woodley and Condit is going to be different 3 and 5. Unfortunately, it's a co-main event. But be that as it may, I mean, Shields has a better resume. Sorry, he does. I mean, the thing that the weird no contest with Ed Herman aside, look at who he's done. Hector Lombard is a terrorist at welterweight. If he gets by that hulking monster,
We are going off of one fight, though.
What do you mean?
He's only won one fight at 170.
Okay, but I mean the streak he's amassed. He's also beating another guy who's a former middleweight. If he gets by Lombard, I'm saying. I think that, to me, that's way more impressive than beating Tyron Woodley. Sorry. I mean, I understand Condit's the more exciting choice, the one you could sell. I get it. But if we're comparing resumes, I think Shields is a much better.
Who compares resumes? Nobody compares resumes. This is the UFC. This is, that's not really you know that we've
But
just
you
been
can't
talking
get a
about.
title shot off a loss. I mean, resumes matter on some
Yes,
level.
you can.
Well, we've seen that happen.
We've seen it, Cam. It
Remember
happens.
last year?
All right. Jesus Christ.
Go back too far for that to.
Come on.
This is true. All right.
I guess
Just give it to Chael Sonnen is all I'm
that's
saying.
true. It does. That would make a lot of sense. I think it would make a lot of people
Off
happy.
TRT, he might be able to make 170. I don't know. I'm just.
Jeff, so you don't think it's a safe bet to say that if Carlos Condit wins, no matter if Jake Shields wins, anyone else, he'll get it, or at least that he deserves it?
I've gotten to the point where I don't say anything is a safe bet anymore, because if I were making the match, I would probably give the match. Let's assume that Condit and let's say all these guys win in a similar fashion. There's nobody does anything more spectacular than anybody else. I think I would give it to Condit, but I don't think that really matters. I don't think that's the criteria that the UFC is using. I think they're looking at, we've got to sell pay-per-view, and we've got to sell this, and we got to sell the fight. Plus, Condit, Hendricks already fought. It was a pretty close fight, but it wasn't a majorly disputed decision. So. But I still think that he's a guy.
That's where GSP sort of vacating the title sort of affects the division, because you're kind of losing out on the opportunities to sort of match up a couple guys underneath him and really get to a number one contender. There really isn't a de facto one as a result of this weekend's fights. It would be nice to maybe match up, Shields with Condit, assuming they won, or some variation thereof. The winners of these two undercard fights, it would be nice to match them up to determine a number one contender, but there's really not time to do that. So you have to just kind of look at whoever has the better performance probably, and let that guy roll.
But it's also a good problem to have. If you've got a whole bunch of people that look like they're all more or less in the same ballpark, not a bad thing,
I would also say real quickly, I mean, I find this to be unlikely, but stranger things have happened. What if Shields goes out there and submits Hector Lombard? Again, I don't find it likely, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And Woodley Condit winds up being a decent fight, but not quite the surprise, amazing finish that you get from Shields. Are you going to whore him then? That to me seems like egregious to ignore him at that point.
Sure. I think the bottom line is there are a lot of scenarios that can play out.
I'm sure the UFC would be thrilled to see Shields finish. That would definitely help them.
Sure.
It's false that he has nothing but boring fights. He has had a lot of boring fights, I agree. He's also had some barn burners. So let's be fair.
It's fun also that all these guys are fighting on the same night. It feels like a mini sort of tournament that's going to play out, but there's no clear-cut path to the title shot.
There's 7 top 15 fighters on the card.
Yeah, and many of them from the same division. Now, as you mentioned,
it's in welterweight. I'm saying
in welterweight. Yeah, right.
Welterweight.
There's also Kevin Gastelum and Rick Story fighting in the featured prelim fight. The whole card is fun. Want to talk about one more fight on the card. I really am intrigued by Miles Jury versus Diego Sanchez. This is classic Joe Silva, young gun versus the veteran, and Jury has never fought anyone quite like Diego Sanchez. But when you talk about the great lightweights and even the up-and-comers right now in the UFC, the Khabibs and the Dos Anjoses and those kind of guys who aren't quite there just yet, but almost there, no one talks about Miles Jury. Undefeated, has had some big wins, but he's done so very quietly. Is he someone we should be talking about more?
This one will tell us that. My sense about this fight is it's not just veteran versus young gun. It's that with Diego Sanchez, the question lingering over him is how much can he still compete with really talented guys? And the question with Jury is, man, we've seen some flashes of brilliance. We've also seen some fight down to his competitor's level. He squeaked by Ricci in a terrible fight. So this fight is a question of where are these guys headed? Truly, where are they right now and where are they going? And I don't think we really know, but like, if you're, I like Miles Jury. We'll see what he does with Diego Sanchez. If he, destroys him, then I'll recant all of this. I don't think he's even in the same ballpark as Khabib Nurmagomedov or Rafael Dos Anjos.
So even if he gets by Sanchez, it doesn't tell you all that much about him.
It's again, all these wins, it's like the complexion of the win is such a key indicator of ability.
He dominated Michael Johnson. That's a pretty good win.
It looks a lot better now than it did when he did it.
I'm not saying he hasn't done anything to deserve the spot. He clearly has. But for both guys, there's a lot of reasons for optimism, and there's as much reasons for doubt. And so this one is about answering which one is you should pay more attention to.
Isn't there a danger though? Like if say he goes out there and dominates Diego Sanchez, aren't some people are just going to go, well, Diego's shot now. They'll kind of going to downgrade it in retrospect, which is not fair to Miles Jury. But I could see that happening before it actually happens.
But that's why if he gets by Diego in a manner and all that you say happens, that's why he needs somebody who's fresh and also on the rise and just on that cusp of being a kick-ass guy in the division.
And he's also on a bigger stage than he's been on before. He hasn't been on a UFC main card yet. So, he's now going to be, the lights are going to be shining a little bit brighter, and he's going to also be, it's not just Diego Sanchez, it's not just any veteran fighter, but it's a guy who is just all pressure, all in your face, all the time. And that's a lot of pressure to both the bright lights and the guy standing in front of you. That's a lot.
I think more people are viewing this fight in terms of the prism of what does this mean for Diego Sanchez? Where is he? Is he on the way out? Which a lot of people seem to think is the case.
Well, I would be very sad if he was on his way out. Did you see him at the open workouts? The show that he put on there.
Man.
There is no one who puts on a better show at the open workouts than Diego Sanchez. Obviously, like we said, great card and very interesting. 13 fights on this card. And last couple weeks on Fight Pass, we've had 8, 9 fights. Those have just flown by. It's not going to be quite the same on Saturday. I'm very curious about the Dennis Bermudez fight. This is a guy who's won 5 in a row, going for 6, and has never fought on a main card. In a featherweight division where guys kind of move up a little quicker, it's surprising to me that Dennis Bermudez doesn't get any more attention. Any other fight we should be looking at? Any other fight that you're really excited about?
For me, the 2 guys you want to keep an eye on, Justin Scoggins and Alex Garcia. I think everyone's like, oh, Brad Pickett, what about a rematch with Demetrius? Man, please, get real. Demetrius Johnson, that fight would be completely different today. And obviously, Pickett won the first time. I think Demetrius Johnson would have his way. Scoggins still very, very early in his development, but that dude has everything you need to be somebody real. And Alex Garcia, we'll see what happens with him. But we'll talk about the best athletes in the UFC. I think that guy's on the short list. So keep
Anything
an eye on
else
him.
on your radars?
I was going to point out Scoggins.
Right.
I agree that he's definitely the one to keep on the radar.
Yeah, the fights that we've talked about already, the ones that I'm not even the main event. I'm actually probably more interested in Shields and Lombard and Jury and Sanchez. In a way, for me, those are the ones I'm most excited to watch.
I'm so excited for the main event, man. I cannot wait. Like Robbie Lawler is like one of the guys before I was covering MMA and writing about other sports. Like he's one of the reasons him and like BJ Penn, like these guys that kind of cross different eras in MMA. So like I just have a sort of a soft spot for those guys, you know. And I'm just so interested in how can he finally come full circle and win the title that he was sort of destined to win from the beginning.
Right.
As you said at the beginning, incredible story.
We alluded to it, but also that Kevin Gastelum Rick Story fight is huge, man.
Yeah.
Rick Story beat Johnny Hendricks. What?
Yeah.
Like how
His only loss.
Right, and he beat Jake Ellenberger too.
I only lost, I say, GSP. I
Right.
don't really consider that.
You know, but you understand, like, and Rick Story has been a flake, man. He looks good amazing against Thiago Alves and then bad against Demian Maia. Where is this guy? And Kevin Gastelum's got nothing but wind at his back. So to me, this is a huge fight about the future of both guys. Very similar to Jury versus Sanchez.
Interesting about that fight, as recently as November, they trained together at TriStar.
Crazy.
GSP brought in Rick Story to help him prepare for Johnny Hendricks, and Gastelum was there. That's when he got injured, preparing for his own fight. He was at TriStar as well, and his manager tells me that he kind of zeroed in on Rick Story and said, I could beat this guy, and they got the fight. They actually asked for it and got the fight. All right, guys, let's talk about last week before we go. Of course, Alexander Gustafsson looking phenomenal against Jimmy Manua.
You spoiled it. I haven't watched that one yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna go
you
home
didn't
and
sign
watch
up for
it.
Fight Pass?
Yeah.
He looked phenomenal until Gustafsson got knocked out, so check it out.
That's right. And then afterwards, the Swede kind of comes out of his shell and says, once again, I want Johnny Bones. Any doubt in your mind that this is the right call? It has to be Gustafsson if Jon Jones wins next, right?
Oh, man. I mean, how do you not make that fight?
Right.
You know, you've got
How
final.
big can that fight be?
As big as Jones Sonnen, maybe?
Really?
Maybe if they treat it right. I mean, if they just, if the UFC promos are more just onomatopoeia and highlights, I don't know how good
What was that?
The onomatopoeia like boom or bang or something. And then they show highlights of someone getting hit. That's not going to cut it. But if they really sort of take their time with it and promote it properly, there's a lot of raw material there. Yeah. Jon Jones seems, what's crazy about Jon Jones is everyone gets on him on Twitter, but it drives him crazy that there's challenges for him, but that there's people out there that are excited about the challenge because they want to see Jones lose, and he's aware of that dynamic that people are desperate to see him lose, and there's two guys that people believe in, because in his mind, I think he thinks he's going to handle both of them,
Sure.
and it drives him crazy that he can't lord over people in the way that he wants
he's
to.
often very active on Twitter during fights. You notice he didn't tweet anything for like a couple hours after that Gustafsson fight. I would have loved to have been with Jon Jones when that fight was going down. Oh, maybe. He knew what was going down. He was watching that fight for sure.
I don't know how you guys feel, but I think on Twitter, him saying, well, Gustafsson or Cormier, I want to fight the best, and people are like, oh my God, he's trying to get rid of contenders. Yeah. I mean, I think most of these fighters don't understand matchmaking. I kind of write that off, but I think the reality is more than anything, he cannot stand the idea fans are excited about Gustafsson because they want to see him lose, and that drives him crazy.
Yeah, I agree. I think it probably does. And people think he's like ducking guys.
Right.
Look at the murderer's row this guy's fought. Who's he ducking? It's the craziest thing in the world.
Well, the ducking stigma, I think, goes back to UFC 151 when he turned down the Chael Sonnen fight. So that's never gonna.
He was afraid of Chael Sonnen.
I don't agree with it, but
fans
hang on to this kind of thing. But he's playing it up. And for the first, he changed his Twitter icon to Daffy Duck. He's trying to egg them on, but you could see he's still writing back and he's still talking to the haters and all that stuff. Is this Jon Jones finally going from Pretty Boy Floyd to Money Mayweather? Is this him finally telling everyone?
We talk about Jon Jones' image so much.
Yes, and that's my next question. Why do we care so much? But it is a big story. You don't care at all.
No, I'm like, in the sense of let him be whoever he wants to be.
But he's still figuring it out in front of us. Nick Diaz doesn't do that. Nick Diaz is who he is from the get-go.
Well,
Jon Jones
maybe sometimes he just, sometimes he tries to present himself as the blue chip sponsor guy, and then other times he's like, if I have something sarcastic to say, you can. Everyone has different elements to their personality, right?
Fans gravitate, in my opinion, and go ahead after this, Jeff, to the guy who, in their opinion, looks real, is real all the time. Nick Diaz is 100% real in their opinion. That's why they love him, good or bad. I don't know if they feel the same way about Jon Jones.
Yeah, I get the feeling, I've wondered about this with Jones. I get the feeling that he is trying to talk the talk like he walks the walk. In his fights, he has been this kind of improvisational, just going for it kind of guy, and I think he's tried to present his persona that way. Whenever I've talked to him, and it's been a very structured kind of, let's say, a very unstructured thing, like some kind of spontaneous thing where I've just had a chance to talk to him, he's at ease and it just sort of flows a little better. But sometimes when he knows what he's trying to promote, it's like he tries too hard to be something. I'm not sure what it is he's trying to be, whether maybe he has his manager in his ear or what it is, but something where he doesn't quite connect on all cylinders. And then I've seen that sometimes.
I just here's the deal. I think I've met Jon Jones a number of times. We all have. I had a chance to talk to him. I don't know him as a person, as like a we're not friends. I think he's a cool guy from what I can tell. I think he sucks at being a people pleaser. I suck at being a people pleaser. I sympathize with this quite easily. Fans have placed a demand on his public persona that is so irrational and so crazy and so out of touch. There's nothing he can say at this point that they'll like. Except, I'm sorry about everything. They want him to bow to him.
But he's also put the demand on himself to a degree, because he's the guy, from the beginning. He's like, my goal is to get Nike as a sponsor and Gatorade as a sponsor, all this stuff. And to do that, a lot of times you have to kind of pull back on your personality a little bit to be corporate. And he's
not good at that.
I know, but this is what he put upon himself, though. I'm saying so. That's what kind of forces him sometimes, I think, to kind of have to kind of shift on the fly and how he presents himself out there. And when people say he's not authentic or whatever, I agree. I think, when I've talked to him, I think he's a pretty cool guy. He comes across fine. He comes across better, I think, in some situations than others. When you're
one-on-one, I think he's much better than addressing sort of audiences.
And that's not that unusual, but he's just in the spotlight a lot. So.
How old is Jon Jones? 26, 27? 26?
Yeah. Something like that. Maybe even younger.
Okay, 26.
He's 26, I think.
I mean, the demands placed on this kid are incredible, and I think he's gone from I want to be a people pleaser to I can't to all right. I mean, F you and your haters and your mothers and you guys living in the van down by the river. I mean, what can he do at this point except to just absorb opprobrium from?
But he still cares very much. I mean, how often does he send out a tweet that's controversial and then delete it seconds away?
Who likes to be hated? Who enjoys that kind of thing?
But there are some guys who have. There are some people who have
she
embraced
doesn't like it. She mutes it. That's different.
Well, but she has embraced it. Mayweather has embraced it.
If she embraced it, she'd look at her @replies on Twitter. She's very selective.
Do you believe that she doesn't?
I think she's very selective about it.
Well, how about Michael Bisping, a guy who totally embraced it and now has become somewhat of a fan favorite? Josh Koscheck. Once he started embracing it, people started to like. It's a weird thing. People like the great character.
You said they like authenticity. People I was at the UFC 145 Q&A. So that was Jones Rashad, and the Q&A was Chael Sonnen. The bros in the audience were high-fiving each other over Sonnen's nursery rhymes. There's nothing about that's authentic. This is shtick, and that's fine if you like shtick. But I think they like someone who is, you can tell, has zero pretension, or they love the ultimate form of pretension. And Jones sort of navigates both spaces without doing either deftly.
I think that's where you really nailed it. I think that he has kind of gone back and forth, and I think it's hard to really get a sense of is he just being real, or is he trying to promote some kind of image? And I think that he sometimes struggles with that, and he hasn't quite settled on where he wants to be. Does he want to just reveal himself, or does he want to sort of, I'm going to be controversial for the sake of being controversial? I think that's where he kind of, I think one of his problems is that.
Do we agree on the fact that if Glover Teixeira wins at UFC 172, and of course he can win in a whole different kind of ways, but it would be very strange, in my opinion, to do Glover versus Alexander, right? I mean,
why would it be strange?
It's got to be Jon Jones getting the immediate rematch. I mean, if Anderson Silva got that same, if Anderson Silva got that same respect going into the fight, remember, Anderson Silva going into the Chris Weidman fight, they said no matter what, you're getting an immediate rematch. Jon Jones has done enough, in my opinion, to deserve an immediate rematch after a loss. Really? You just said he went through a murderer's row.
He did.
He arguably went through the greatest list of champions ever, or ex-champions. How does he not deserve it? To me, it says a lot about his current relationship with the UFC. They're not going out there and saying, this is the best. You're about to watch. They talk about Renan Barão being maybe the best pound for pound. They talk about Ronda Rousey being the biggest star. Chris Weidman. You don't hear all that much about Jon Jones.
He's not a company guy, so he pays for it in the end.
That's why he may not get the immediate rematch, but he should.
I don't know. I don't know that anybody deserves an immediate rematch. So
when you've done all that much, you deserve an immediate rematch.
Why?
Why? Because you did all that much. It happens in every sport.
When you lose, you kind of have to start, not from the bottom, but you kind of have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off before you just get right back in there.
Jon Jones losing to Glover, the immediate rematch would be way bigger from a business standpoint than Glover versus Alexander Gustafsson.
Have to sit,
that might be why they're
longer.
doing it.
He won his fight. He did what was asked of him, and then he's got to suffer for it. because the guy lost? That's not right.
I just think it's too early to say Gustafsson gets the immediate title shot because you don't know what's going to happen in that fight.
Maybe if it's like a really controversial split decision. Okay, if Glover takes Jon Jones down in the first minute and elbows him into oblivion, why would he deserve an immediate rematch?
Anderson Silva got knocked out.
I know.
And he was
I'm not
saying he deserved it.
Did you not think?
Huh?
Did you not think that was the right call to make? Anderson Silva, Weidman too.
Obviously, from a financial perspective, it's great. But I just don't necessarily agree that just because you.
Man, let me just say, Gustafsson versus Teixeira as a main event on pay-per-view is DOA, man. And then UFC knows that
Everyone
too,
loves
man.
the chase, right? Jones going back for the title would be huge.
And I don't mean to disrespect either of those guys. They're incredible fighters, but as promotional entities, woo, that is dead zone territory.
We're also talking about rules of
You must have missed a few pay-per-views they put on over the last few months. I mean,
Teixeira versus a Swede versus Brazilian that people aren't.
I'm just always wary of saying this guy's getting the title shot right away when you don't know what's going to happen in that title fight. It's almost
that's kind of my point. It's like, how are we saying he gets an immediate rematch? Let's see how the fight happens first. That if Jones gets destroyed,
what I'm saying is they're saying Gustafsson's getting the fight next, but what happens?
But he's
if
already
Glover
won
wins?
his fight. He's already. Okay, all right. No,
they say he's next.
you.
Well, they say he's next in line. I mean, I think that it's fair to say Gustafsson's next in line, but we never know what's. Didn't we say when? It seems to me that when Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard were fighting, when they had their like 15 fight thing that went on for about 10 years, that seemed like there was always somebody waiting. There was always waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and it never happened because they kept put these guys back and forth, until they got to be old and too old to be in the cage. But that could be the same thing here. We got Gustafsson is the next guy in line. Doesn't mean that he is guaranteed the next fight. He may still be standing in line while these guys fight.
Sure, and I certainly don't think Daniel Cormier should then wait, which is what Dana White said to someone on Twitter, wait for the winner of Gustafsson versus the winner of the 172 fight. Cormier won't fight it for the rest of 2014.
I thought waiting was a bad thing. Right? Aren't you supposed to stay active?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah,
until they don't have a fight for you, then they tell you what.
Right.
And I'll be the first to admit, the win over Patrick Cummins does make you the number. I'm just kidding. That's a whole different can of worms for a different day.
Pound for pound number one is what
yes.
it makes you.
Guys, great job. And of course, as I mentioned at the top, we are just hours away from the UFC crowning their first UFC welterweight champion, not named Georges St-Pierre, since 2007. How weird is that? 7 years, someone not named Georges St-Pierre has been the UFC welterweight champion. It will happen Saturday night in Dallas, Texas, UFC 171. If you have a comment or question about anything we talked about on today's show, leave it in the comment section below. We'll be back next week for a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. For Luke, Mike, Jeff, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching the show right here on MMAfighting.com.